And welcome back to Success Made to Last. I'm Rick Tocquigny. Hope you all had a great week. Our special scheduled guest today is Mike Guardia, who has written another great book. It's called Tomcat Fury. Mike is an internationally recognized author and military historian. He's a veteran of the United States Army, served 6 years on active duty as an armor officer. He's the author of the widely acclaimed How More, A Soldier Once and Always, the first ever biography chronicling the life of Lieutenant Harold G. Moore, whose battlefield leadership was popularized by the film We Were Soldiers, the film that starred Mel Gibson. He has twice been nominated for the Army Historical Foundation Distinguished Book Award. Today we're going to be talking about Tomcat Fury. Let's see if we get Mike on the line. Mike, good morning and welcome back to Success Made to Last.
Hey, Rick. It's a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Nice to talk to you again. And we
Absolutely.
love your book, Tomcat Fury. I've done a little intro on you and your background, and it's good to talk to you again. I think the last time you and I spoke, it was about your book on Harold Moore. Tell us about Tomcat Fury. Why did you write it?
All righty. Well, I got to tell you, of all the planes in America's inventory, I think the F-14 Tomcat has held a place in my heart for a lot of reasons, being the focus of the film Top Gun, but just the incredible combat history that it's had and what the plane has been able to accomplish, not only as an air superiority fighter, but also as a latter-day ground attack aircraft. Just an incredible plane, and really, despite its ubiquity, I was quite surprised that no one had yet written a combat comprehensive history, and one that was told predominantly from the perspective of the pilots who flew it. And that's really what inspired me to take up the project.
Yeah, what we love about it is that you've almost personified the F-14, and you've done it through some great storytelling. And for starters, tell our listening audience a little bit about the origin of the F-14. Why was it developed at the time that it was developed, and how in the world did it last for 3 decades?
Absolutely. All righty. Well, let's wind the clocks back to about 1963. And the early 60s was kind of a watershed moment in American aviation history, because it was around that time that we started to realize that our military avionics had fallen behind our Soviet counterparts. There was a big reliance on using missiles instead of having pilots maintain their dogfighting skills. So at around this time, we started to get wise that the existing series of fighters that we had were really falling behind the Warsaw Pact, and realized, okay, well, we have to make some changes here. Not only do we have to revitalize our air-to-air combat tactics, we also have to have a more resilient plane in the air. Now, the F-14 itself, in more ways than one, began life as what would eventually become the F-111. It was the right idea, but it was unfortunately pretty poorly executed. Now, the plane eventually found life as a latter-day attack aircraft, but the Navy had really put a lot of time and money into trying to make it. So after they realized that the F-111 couldn't accomplish that, they went back to the drawing board, and they brought Grumman Aerospace on board to say, okay, we need a resilient fighter that can take off and land on a carrier deck that has a high endurance. It can stay aloft for long periods of time on one tank of fuel, and it can be adapted to a variety of missions to protect the parent fleet. So in a roundabout way, that was the genesis of the F-14, and by the middle of 1970, we had a working prototype that was making the very first of its maiden flights.
Amazing. I had an interview once, Mike, with a pilot and who flew F-14s, and he told me that landing that an F-14 or any other jet on an aircraft carrier was the equivalent of you or me taking a dive from 10 yards away and picking up a quarter with our teeth. Is that true, or is that just a legend?
I believe every word of that. Yeah, I've had quite a few pilots telling me something very similar. They say, it's one of the hardest things in the world when you're taking a multi-million-dollar aircraft and trying to land it on what is essentially a moving target. You have to accelerate the plane instead of decelerate it, which is what land-based pilots do. Add to the chaos and confusion, you have to land the plane just right in order to hit the arresting wire. Otherwise, you have to gun the plane and try and make it off the end of the carrier deck, come around for another pass.
Yeah, it is. It's extraordinary to think about that. So Top Gun sequel is coming up. I don't know whether it will be released this summer or not, but what plane has evolved from the F-14 that we will probably be seeing in the movie? And what will you be looking for in that movie relative to looking back at the history of the Tomcat?
Right. Well, since the F-14 has been retired, the F-18 Hornet has really taken up the reins as the Navy's premier carrier base. It has done an incredible job, but there is quite a big swath of the naval aviation community that still to this day was very sad to see the F-14 Tomcat go. They also tend to think that it was very prematurely retired. So in this upcoming Top Gun sequel, I know for sure that we're going to be seeing the F-18 highlighted. And what I'll be looking for, really, I think is a derivative of what I saw in the first film, just a tale of how incredibly resilient these pilots can be in the face of mortal danger, where you have to make very quick and long-lasting decisions within a fraction of a second. And, how it's the right combination of good training and good equipment that will always carry the day.
You bet. It's so great. Your work is, I think, getting better and better because at the heart of you, Mike, is this historian, and I think there is also this curious young man who wants to find out this deeper level of detail. Give our audience, at least those that are aspiring writers, an encouraging word about practicing their craft so they can become a writer like you who has a heart and soul to your narrative.
Right. Well, thank you, Rick. Well, if there's any one piece of advice that I could give anyone in the listening audience, above all else, it would be there's always more than one way to get your story to the market. I think it's been a persistent thing over the past few decades that, the traditional publishing houses and literary agents have been the gatekeepers and the final arbiters of what stories get to the marketplace. And I'm not trying to cast them in a bad light at all. I've had a very good experience with traditional publishers and agents, but if that route does not prove advantageous to any potential writer out there, there are a multitude of other publishing platforms that will not only get your stories to the market, but will also help you find an eager audience who is very willing to take on your work and very willing to listen to what you have to say.
Good. I love that. Do you believe that after writing your book, Tomcat Fury, that you have seen, are you getting closer to the best version of Mike Guardia?
Well, I still think it'll take a few decades before I get there, but I think with every book I write, I try to make my craft a little bit better, and I try to refine my skills just a little bit more. And if I can make every successive book just a little bit qualitatively better than the last, and if I can keep my base of readership interested, and if I can keep them happy in my work, then consider myself a successful author.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that. I got a couple other questions for you, and it's about Robert McNamara. And I know this is just now two dudes talking over a podcast, but it seems to me, having grown up in the 50s and 60s, 10 years away from after the World War II, and having personally seen in Sherman, Texas, near Perrin Air Force Base, people that made money from the war effort.
Mm-hmm.
I've always had this sneaking suspicion that Robert McNamara, coming over from being CEO of General Motors into the Lyndon Johnson administration, that he was one of those profiteers of the Vietnam War. Can you weigh in on that? Is that just a suspicion on my part, or is there any truth to that?
Well, it's really kind of a complicated matter. The defense industry, it is designed to make money, but there is an overarching purpose to try to get the best available equipment to our servicemen.
Mm-hmm.
The hang-up that I have traditionally had with McNamara, and I use the term very lightly, was just there was an overriding business mentality to how he approached the war in Vietnam. And,
Yep.
And while I know that he had every great intention under the sun, and I give him credit for that, what I think it highlighted more than anything is that any leader in a geopolitical or a military sense really can't apply the same bean counter metrics-based leadership to a government organization that's trying to accomplish a strategic goal. When you're dealing with hearts and minds, and when you're dealing with bombs and bullets, you really have to have an extra dimension of leadership beyond what works in the boardroom.
Mm. Are you implying that if he had been a soldier or he had been a pilot, which I don't know whether he was either, and not so much a titan of the industry, that perhaps he wouldn't have taken the same approach to the finished product?
I've always thought that people who are in positions to make decisions like that should have some frontline experience in that particular realm of military operations, because I think from a metaphysical standpoint, you really just can't have the same point of view, and you can't have the same perceptions that would come unless you have that background.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I love that opinion of yours. I wanted to get that out in today's show. And then last question is, what's your next project, Mr. Guardia?
Absolutely. Let's see. I actually have 3 projects in the hopper as of right now.
Of course you do.
And one is called Danger Forward, and that is a biography of a remarkable gentleman. His name is Paul Gorman. And if that name does not ring a bell, he is a 1950 West Point graduate, had his first taste of combat as a young lieutenant at the Battle of Pork Chop Hill. He later commanded American forces in Vietnam at the Battle of Bong Trang back in 1966, and he became the principal architect of what today is known as the Pentagon Papers.
Oh, wow. How is that project on Paul Gorman not eating your lunch? That sounds like it's monumental in its magnitude.
It has been an incredible project, and I am beyond blessed to be working on it. General Gorman is still alive, and he's been giving me a wealth of information and stories that just blow my mind.
Okay, and what are the other 2 minor projects you're working on?
Well, the other projects I'm working on right now include a book called Days of Fury, and that in many ways is a companion piece to an earlier book I wrote called The Fires of Babylon. It tells the story of the Battle of 73 Easting, but this time the story is being told from a sister unit that fought alongside Eagle Troop. And the other project I'm working on is a book called Skybreak, the story of the 58th Fighter Squadron in Desert Storm. They were an Air Force squadron that achieved more MiG kills than any other unit throughout the entire war.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Mike, you are in the middle of some greatness. And at the end of the completion of the projects, those 3, how do you want to look as a best version author?
Well, just want to be seen as a great modern day storyteller, someone who any reader can go to and say, hey, if I want a story that is a telltale story of what the human spirit can accomplish when the chips are down and the odds are stacked against you, then I got to pick up Juan's books.
That is excellent. That's a great vision. That's realistic, and you're headed that direction. I can tell.
Well, thank you, sir.
Just by the detail that was in Tomcat Fury, and I congratulate you on your great progress. We'll have you back on the show, I promise you. And I did another show about you the other day where I just riffed about Mike Guardia's book, Tomcat Fury, just from the perspective of appreciating the detail. And so there's actually 2 shows out, Mike, on Tomcat Fury for our listening audience to enjoy. Hey, thank you so much, and we're looking forward to having you back on to let's talk about General Paul Gorman next, or any other topic you'd like to riff about, Mike. That would be great. We always love having you on.
Absolutely, Rick. Well, it is my pleasure to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. That was author Mike Guardia of Tomcat Fury. We appreciate him being on our Author's Corner today. Here's a guy who has served our country well. And now, as Frederick Butcher would say, your vocation in life comes from where your greatest joy meets the world's greatest need. He's delivering wonderful narratives, books, and I hope that all of you will go out and buy Mike's books. We loved his book on Hal Moore, and then this one is Tomcat Fury. It's beautifully written with great detail. And if you're a military historian or appreciate studying all the aircrafts from the United States Air Force, Navy, etc., you'll love this book. Hey, thanks for joining us on Success Made to Last. On our website, successmadetolast.com, there is a survey.